Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of the Reimagine podcast. Laura, welcome.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here again, and we have some familiar faces with us. I'd like to introduce Ramsey Smith. You've seen him a few times over the last few weeks here with the Reimagining Retirement series. He's also founder of Alex.fyi. And Ramsey, if you could please introduce our next guest.
I would be delighted to. Great to be back here on the Reimagine podcast, and very delighted to introduce our guest, Keren Etkin, who I think is setting the distance record for any guest on any podcast or variation of a podcast we've done. She comes all the way from Israel to talk to us today. And Keren is a self-styled gerontechnologist. And she is somebody that we discovered at Alex.fyi maybe about a year or so ago and featured in one of our pieces called 5 Questions with fill in the blank thought leader. One of the many things that is pretty remarkable about Keren is that she's relatively young for somebody in this space. So it's great to see that there is youthful energy and youthful ideas coming into the space. And that she's able to do it from Israel. So in addition to working with startups in Israel, she's very active here in the United States. And we're delighted to have a chance to talk with her today. So with that, Keren, tell us a little bit about what brought you to this specific journey, because you're doing something very unique, and I think you add a lot to the space.
Thank you, Ramsey, for this wonderful introduction. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I got into this space almost by chance about a decade ago. I'm a gerontologist by training, and I didn't set out to be a gerontologist. I started my career as a life sciences student. I wanted to become a scientist, research cancer, and I was volunteering with Holocaust survivors at the time, which are all old now. And I realized how fascinating this space that was and how much of an impact one person could make if they were in the right place at the right time. So I went on to work in the nonprofit sector and study gerontology as my master's degree. And then I was recruited to this startup, Intuition Robotics, as their first employee to build a social robot for older adults. It was probably one of the most exciting times of my life, and they're still going strong. I'm super proud of the company. And during my time at Intuition, I realized that there were so many wonderful startups out there developing amazing tech-based products and solutions for older adults. And I figured, why not map out this space, put up a market map, put it online? Because if I was curious about this space, some other people probably are as well. And it turns out I was right. It got a lot of traction. It sort of took off from there. So I've been doing the Gerontechnologist for the past 4 years almost. And it's a wonderful online space that I have to sort of review the entire HTech ecosystem, not just startups, but also check out what big tech companies are doing in this space and who's investing in this space and what types of accelerators are running, and check out all the conferences. And it's a really, really wonderful thing to have. And the wonderful sort of side effect of it, I'm using air quotes, is that I get to have a lot of interesting conversations with interesting people from all over the world, like yourselves. So that's me in a nutshell.
All right. So look, what are some of the things that you are seeing as the sort of the most important issue? So we've got a broad space. There are a lot of elements to tackle when one is aging, some of which hopefully can be addressed by technology. What are some of the most intriguing either startups or initiative you're seeing right now?
Well, it's a really tough question because being an entrepreneur myself, when I see a new startup or I meet an entrepreneur and I hear them speak passionately about their startup, I sort of, it's infectious, right? So whenever I talk to entrepreneurs, if you ask me today what's the most exciting startup, is probably the one that I spoke to an hour ago.
Let's hear about
it. It's actually a startup in the fintech space, and I think generally speaking, the fintech space is potentially the most exciting space right now because it's a huge problem, right? The financial wellness and the financial wellness span of people in retirement is a huge problem. People retire at like 65, and potentially they could live up to 85, 90, 100. Where's the money going to come from? So a lot of the companies are trying to tackle this from all different angles, whether it is scam prevention or whether it is trying to help people manage their savings and figure out what they can do to make their savings stretch for more years. So those are that's like the problem that I'm most excited about right now. But if you would ask me that question tomorrow or next week, I could probably give you a different answer.
Interesting. Yeah, we've we've been poking at the same issue to say, well, a lot of these issues in older ages are funding related problems, or they're a problem of you're living in a home or environment where it's too expensive and you haven't sort of managed your expenses to your funding. We have a partnership with say a pilot partnership with Meet Jerry. Farron Blanc's been on here, and trying to explore as people deal with the issues of living in an older age, how does that intersect with the financial question? And how do you see it fitting? Like I love your map. We're doing sort of a retiretech map. Some of these companies split across it, like Re in Oregon. We've had her on with who founded Silver. She's doing some just great stuff, and we've got a episode coming up in the next couple of weeks, right, Laura? Is the overlap in your mind? Is it 10% overlap in the needs, or is it more like a 50-50? What does age tech related but not so close, or is it like, oh my gosh, these problems are overlapping with the financial issues? They go hand in hand.
It's a great question. To me, HTech is sort of like an umbrella term for all the different tech products and services that enable older adults to live their best lives, right? So these could be fintech companies, these could be digital health companies, these could be companies like Intuition Robotics, which develops a social solution for loneliness and social isolation, and tech for caregivers. That's also part of the HTech landscape. So it's not. I don't know if it's a 10% overlap or it's a 50% overlap. I like to think of it as different categories in the HTech landscape. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely does. And I think it varies by segment. When you think of gerontology, I'm thinking, oh, that was my grandmother who's 85. I mean, what is the age range where you sort of feel like age tech is a thing for me?
That is such a great question. Thank you for asking that, Paul. So technically speaking, if you look at retirement age in most countries, it's around 65 years old, right? But when you look at older adults, 65 is the new 55, if not 50, right? Many 65-year-olds are still healthy, active, fit. Many of them are still working, whether it's part-time or full-time, or whether it's their second or third career. So if you ask me, old age starts later these days, 75, maybe 80. Although when I look at the HTech landscape, I do take 65 as sort of a threshold, because that's the legal retirement age in most countries. And also for people who do choose to retire, it's a pivotal moment in their lives, right? So even if they don't need a medical alarm, they still need different products and services potentially than someone who is 25. So they might be looking to make money in retirement, or sort of like only semi-retire. So they might be looking for income, whether it's gig income or whether it's learning new skills so they could get a job at 65 or 60, or whether it's recreational stuff. So pre-COVID, when people used to travel, there were a lot of solutions geared towards uh, enabling older adults to travel, and enabling older adults to meet socially in the world with other people. And when you think of it, just getting out into the world can be challenging if you live in a rural area and you don't have access to public transport, or if you just spent the last 50 or 40 years at work and you retire and you find out you don't have any friends. Where do you meet friends at this stage in your life? So we have companies solving that issue. So coming back to your question, we need to definitely segmentize the market, and old age probably starts later these days. However, as gerontologists, we look at like the young old, the middle old, and the old. So when I speak to entrepreneurs, I advise startups, and when I speak to entrepreneurs, I always tell them, you need to segmentize this market. Not everyone is your grandma. It's great that you saw that your grandma has this problem and you decided to build a company to solve your grandma's problem, but not everyone is your grandma. And not every person over the age of 65 is the same. And also not every person at the age of 75 is the same. You need to look at the social aspects, the health aspects, the financial aspects of people's persona, if you will, if you're looking at a customer persona or your user persona, to segmentize the market.
Ramsey, are you near old, middle old, or not old?
So I like to think I'm far old. I like to think I'm far away from being old, but I'm probably a little bit nearer than I, than I appreciate. So it's interesting. What you're saying is very important, because there is this general view that we think of retirement and old age as being somehow monolithic, when you're absolutely right, it's not. And the differences in needs in those various segments are meaningful. I wonder what are some of the key differences between the needs at each of those stages. I mean, I don't want to. I'll pick sort of 55 to 65 versus 65 to 75, but you can cut it up any way you want. Like, what in the segments that you've determined, what are the key differences? Like, the reason I ask is if you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to figure out how to answer the question that's relevant for each of those segments. How do you coach people on making that adjustment when they're trying to solve for their grandma and you realize, guys, you have it wrong? What are some of the things that you tell them to coach them to sort of get closer to the right place?
Well, first of all, obviously you need to understand what the problem it is that you're solving, and then from that figure out who is the person that's most affected by this problem. And it doesn't necessarily, they're not necessarily going to be everyone in the same age group. So if we're looking, for example, at loneliness and social isolation, it's a problem that affects people at 6 years old and at 90 years old. And it's not necessarily your age that determines whether or not you're lonely. It's more of your health can determine whether you're at a higher risk of loneliness. Your social circles around you, whether if you're happily married, or if you're a widower, or if you have 10 children who live in your neighborhood and come to visit you every day, or if your children, you have one child that lives 2 states away and you only see them twice a year. So when entrepreneurs are segmentizing the market, they need to realize who is this problem affecting, how painful it is for them, and obviously who's gonna be willing to pay for the solution. So segmentizing based on age, while it is the easiest thing to do, it's not always the right thing to do.
So you've brought up social isolation a few times, and from what we understand, you one of the ventures that you've worked with specifically focused on that. I think you mentioned it. Was it Social Robot? If I assume I got that right. Tell us a little bit about how technology was able to address that very fundamental problem.
So what we saw in the past year because of COVID is that everyone gets lonely from time to time, right? I think we all felt loneliness during the past year. And it brings to light the fact that many older adults are lonely all the time, not just because there's a pandemic and they're sheltering in place. So the way technology can help is, and the way LEQ, our social robot, helped is it's an enabler of human connection, right? Because at a very basic level, all human beings need social connections to other human beings. And if you're in your home, whether it's pandemic or not, if you don't have the means to socially connect to other human beings, you're going to get lonely. So there are many companies trying to solve this. So at Intuition Robotics, we built a social robot as an enabler. So it would be sitting in someone's home and helping them connect to their family members. Because what we see in this day and age is that a lot of the family conversation happens on digital platforms, right? In Israel, it's very, very common that families have a WhatsApp group, right? So the family conversation is always going on almost 24/7 in that WhatsApp group. It's a chat app. And if your grandparents aren't on that WhatsApp group, then they're basically excluded from the family conversation. And that's a horrible, horrible feeling. So what LEQ, for example, could do is bring the elderly back into that family conversation and enable the grandchildren or the adult children to text or send a voice message to the robot, and the robot would then read it out loud to grandma, and grandma would be able to reply just by using her voice. She doesn't need to learn anything new, and it will do all of sorts of wonderful things for her as well, as like remind her to take her meds, or proactively suggest that they listen to music together, or they do like a cognitive game together to stimulate her brain, or a number of other things. So that's like one solution. And you also see other solutions like what Papa is doing, right? So they started with grandkids on demand, pairing up college students with older adults who needed companionship. And during COVID, what they did was virtual companionship on demand. And that's a wonderful solution. So you see that we have this one issue that's really, really painful, and it impacts people's not only emotional well-being, but it actually impacts their physical well-being. And being lonely is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's how bad it is. And we have all these different companies trying to tackle this issue with different solutions, and I think it's great.
So that's the quote that's going to go on the that's going to go on the post. Loneliness is equal to 15 cigarettes a day. That's a great line.
It's not my quote. It's some research, I think.
Well,
probably.
we'll find it. But
We'll
that's,
find
yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
you talk about, obviously, HTech is important. Technology, we're sitting here in 2021, it's important. Have you found, when you've been speaking to the entrepreneurs, or you yourself as an entrepreneur, have you come across resistance to technology in any of the specific segments of these older adults? And if so, what's going on out there to help have the conversation about, yes, you can trust technology to help solve some of these major challenges?
It is very, very rare that I would come across resistance to technology. When I go out into the field and I speak to older adults about technology, they want to be in on it. So they're looking to adopt technologies, it's not necessarily that they're actively looking on Amazon for tech solutions for their problems, but they're open to it, which is great. And it's very, I don't want to say counterintuitive, but it's against common belief, if you will. So older adults are definitely wanting to adopt technology, willing to adopt technology. However, they won't just buy anything, and they won't just use anything. It has to fit their needs. It has to enhance their lives. It has to make them feel good about themselves, and not make them feel like they're old and frail and can't do anything right. So I always say that usability is one aspect of it, and it's an important aspect of it, but it's also about desirability, right? So let's take, for example, wearables for fall detection or for panic buttons. You have these clunky bracelets or pendants that have been around since the 80s that no one wants to wear, right? And then you have the Apple Watch, this beautifully designed watch that everyone wants to wear. Yeah, it's expensive. It's not for everyone. It's not affordable. But I can't imagine, or I imagine it's very, very rare that someone will get it as a gift and not want to wear it, because it doesn't make you feel bad about yourself. And yes, it has fall detection, which is amazing. And yes, it has like the Best Buy health app on it if you want. But it also makes you feel cool and hip, and it makes you feel good about yourself. And it has an added value that it will also alert your family or 911 if you have a fall.
So if I solve that loneliness, I have a product, Keren. It's going to solve the loneliness problem, and I want to scale my company as quickly as possible. Who's my end customer that I think will really drive adoption? Is it the senior? Is it the child of the senior, or is it the institution where that older person may live?
That is the billion-dollar question. So one of the things that are important to understand about this market is that we have many different stakeholders, right? So we have the older adult who may or may not be the user. So the older adult can be the user, the family caregiver can be the user, the paid caregiver from the agency can be the user, or the staff member from the senior living community can be the user. We have all these different stakeholders. We have users, we have payers, we have other people who have an opinion on this matter. And the tricky part for entrepreneurs and for tech companies is to make everyone happy, right? And to make sure that even if your payer and the user are two different people, then you have a value to offer both of these personas. So that's tricky, but it can be done, and it is done. And many companies are doing it and doing it successfully, and they have traction. But it's something that entrepreneurs need to understand, and sometimes they learn it the hard way.
So I'm just fascinated by this relationship between, again, these life quality issues, these issues of sort of self-identity. When you were talking about the the Apple Watch versus I've fallen and can't get up. I don't remember the name of that, but it's certainly forgettable. Other than the tagline, because inevitably, to the extent those things affect your health, they're going to affect your finances. And I think that we have this sort of separation between sort of the financial issue and what the financial thing is supposed to cover. And it seems to me there's a lot of money to be saved by all parties involved by not just focusing on the money for money's sake, but also to focus on sort of the problem it's supposed to solve. And look, obviously that's the holy grail. But as you spell it out there, I mean, it is quite compelling. So, I mean, I guess it's a bit of an open question, but have you seen any financial companies that are actually trying to sort of bridge that gap? Has anybody done that yet?
Trying to bridge the gap between lifespan and wealth span?
Well, yeah, but specifically trying to bridge the gap by addressing the use of the funds, as opposed to saying, well, here's a way to make more funds. Have you seen anybody bridge that gap? I can't think of anybody. Maybe Paul, you do, but
I would say there are products with features that are triggered by events. So for instance, I purchased an annuity or a life insurance policy that has cash value. If I find myself in a nursing home, if I find myself unable to perform one of the key activity, acronyms kill me, but the activity standards of living, right? I can get easy access to the cash value or the account value in the product, and it's not long-term care insurance, it's not disability, but it's sort of penalty-free withdrawal. That's about as far, I think, as the insurance industry has really gone here. So, Keren, I've seen companies that are in the long-term care space experiment around the fringes with different sort of concierge services, but I haven't seen any breakouts.
Well, there is obviously companies like Silver, who is trying to help people make their funds stretch. And there are also companies like Assured Allies, for example, who are trying to help people stay in their homes longer rather than move into a facility, which is not only supposed to be less expensive, but also supposed to be better for their overall well-being. Because as we know, aging in place is universally accepted as the best option for older adults, right? But yeah, when you mention like all of these financial instruments, you're the experts. I mostly focus on the tech companies, on the fintech side, rather than on the long-term care insurance. And I do know, however, that in the United States, long-term care insurance policies are getting fewer and fewer, right? It's more difficult to get long-term care insurance these days. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely.
Correct.
I mean, carriers have stopped issuing them. It's consolidated. It's why it's a product everybody wants, but interest rates keep getting lower and lower. All these policies are written 10 years ago. People said, oh, we're going to see a 2%, 3% lapse rate. No, if you paid that much money into your policy, you're keeping it. So unfortunately, the financial solutions are sort of paring down. As I say, I think, Ramsey, right, most of the products I'm seeing today are all accelerated access to benefits based on some catastrophic event. I haven't seen anybody sort of link, here's an app or here's a service that will reduce your chances of actually having to use that particular feature.
Well, I think that's the magic bullet if we can get there. I mean, that's the message I'm hearing from everything that Keren is saying about, like, the key issues are loneliness, how that's tied to health. The key issue is the solutions that are being presented are things that are sometimes things that make you feel worse about yourself instead of better about yourself. I was very interested to hear about the social robot, because when you first said it, I thought, okay, it sounds like a robot it's gonna be Alexa talking, but in fact, it's actually to bridge the gap with your family. So it may do those other things as well, but it actually, what you're saying, it actually helps keep you connected in a way that meets you where you are. This is something we've used a lot on this show, right? But it's allowing the retiree to stay connected, but in a way that's a comfortable transition for them. So that's very powerful.
Keren, I love to ask this question because we meet so many fascinating people, yourself included. What is your why? What makes you do what you're doing every day? You wake up and this is what you've chosen for your life. What is that why?
Well, like I said in the beginning, I feel like this space, because it's obviously the biggest demographic shift we'll get to experience in our lifetime. And obviously the longevity economy is like the second largest economy in the world. But also, I feel like in this space, one person in the right time at the right place can have a major impact. And sort of that's my why. That's why I wake up in the morning. I try to make a positive impact on this world however I can. And right now I feel that like being an HTech evangelist and shouting from the virtual rooftops how big of an opportunity this is, and that everyone should be paying attention, and entrepreneurs and investors alike. I feel like that's the impact that I make on this world right now.
A question for you about innovation in Israel. I mean, it's astonishing, the innovation that's coming here. And we actually have a great pipeline through Upward Hartford to a number of Israeli startups. I see some of the companies on your map are actually part of Shana Schlossberg's program. Culturally speaking, how different is aging socially and culturally in Israel than you would say in the U.S.? Similar, and so it's this is a great proving ground, or companies start here, but then they've got to adapt when they get to the U.S. Because of the way the healthcare system works, or just how you deal with your parents.
Well, it's similar in a lot of ways, and it's different in some very fundamental ways. So fundamentally, Israel is a very small country geographically. So when we live 2 hours away from our parents, that is considered long distance for us. Whereas in the US, 2 hours is like, no worries, I'll drive tomorrow to see my mom. So that is one major difference that we have. And also we're still in some ways somewhat of a tribal society. So people tend to live close to their parents and close to their grandparents. We have a high fertility rate for a Western country. We may have the highest fertility rate out of all OECD countries. So the demographics here is slightly different. However, we do have a long life expectancy. And in that aspect, people do live a long life in Israel, and they do face some of these same issues. And just because they have a big family which lives nearby doesn't mean that they don't get lonely. And even if they have a small state pension and they have state-funded healthcare, doesn't mean that they don't have financial stress of figuring out how their life savings are going to last for 20 or 30 years. So I think definitely the family aspect and the geographic aspect are different. The healthcare aspect is definitely a difference. One major difference is also the way that we fund home care. So home care is also publicly funded here, and almost everyone is eligible to at least a few hours a week paid by the state of Israel. So a lot of the expenses that older adults and caregivers have in the United States are paid for by the state here. But a lot of the challenges are still the same. So if you have a caregiver, even if the state funds your caregiver that comes to help your mom with ADL, you still need to figure out how to find a home care agency and who is the best caregiver for your mom. You still need to figure out how to handle your mom's finances. You still need to figure out how your mom is not gonna become lonely with you working 10 or 12 hours a day and only coming to visit on the weekends. So Israel is a great testing ground for a lot of these companies. That's part of the reason why we have so much innovation here. Because as a society, we're entrepreneurial and we're open to innovation, and now we're older adults are very open to trying out new products and services and be beta testers. Same goes for the elder care system here, and nursing homes and independent living facilities and home care agencies are very open to trying out new technologies. And yes, then entrepreneurs move to the US to the bigger market, because we're a tiny market. We're only 9 million people, only 1 million older adults. And when they move to the big one, they obviously have to make some adjustments, mostly culturally and from the product and marketing aspects. The technology under the hood tends to stay the same.
It's amazing. It's amazing for a number of reasons, among other things, that there's a more sort of well-developed safety net, social safety net in Israel, from what I understand, than we have here in the U.S. And even though it solves some problems, there's still a lot of work left to do, which is a very interesting insight. So I don't. That's most of the questions I had, Paul. Anything else you and Laura wanted to ask? This has been a great conversation.
This is terrific. One question, and I'll throw it over to Laura, is, yeah, by the way, I'm a venture capitalist, not really, with $100 million to invest. Which of these sectors in your map would you be most bullish on? Paul, put 80% of your money here. Where would you tell VCs who might be listening to focus most of their effort?
That is a great question. I don't know if I would tell any investor to put all the chips in one category. I would, however, look at the categories that are less saturated and have less competition from big tech companies. So, for example, like the finance category is not so saturated. The retirement 2.0 is not so saturated. The fitness aspect is not taken care of. The home care definitely needs help. The whole caregiving, the caregivers are struggling under the burden of caregiving and working full-time jobs and caring for the children. So there are a lot of places where the categories are not yet saturated. And the most important thing I look at when I speak to entrepreneurs is just figuring out that this problem actually exists for other people and not just for their grandma, and that they're actually doing, if they're solving a problem that someone else is already solving, that they're doing it in a better way, in a more innovative way, and that they're not doing more of the same. Because a lot of the times you'll see 5 or 10 products in the same category that are basically the same, and then you need to find a competitive edge.
So Keren, if people want to learn more, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Well, the best way is to visit the Gerontechnologist.com. And I'm also launching 2 online courses this spring. So they're going to be live for entrepreneurs and investors, and also for elder care professionals who want to get a deeper understanding of tech for older adults. So those would be at the Gerontechnologist.com/academy.
Fabulous. Thanks so much for joining us today.
That was great.
Thank you for
very
having me.
much.
Yeah, thank you.
Excited to see your course. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it really does. We'll definitely have you involved in our next series of events. And Ramsey, thanks for making the connection. And Laura, thanks everybody. And join us again next week for another episode of the Reimagine podcast.